My dear friends, we live in a world where noise is everywhere. The noise of traffic, the noise of people, and most dangerously, the noise of our own restless minds. Have you ever noticed that when life gets too loud, we stop hearing what truly matters? Silence is not emptiness. Silence is fullness. In silence, we discover clarity. In silence, we find answers. And in silence, we naturally attract everything we truly desire. Many people believe desire is fulfilled by shouting, demanding, or endlessly chasing. But in reality, the greatest magnet for success, peace, and love is a calm mind and a silent heart. Let me share with you some reflections. Many people in today's world mistake silence for weakness. They think that if you don't respond to an insult, you are timid. If you don't shout back in an argument, you are powerless. If you don't constantly prove yourself with words, you lack confidence. But the truth is the exact opposite. Silence is not the absence of power. Silence is the presence of tremendous power. It is like a lion sitting calmly in the jungle. It doesn't need to roar every second to prove it is the king. Its silence is enough to command respect. Let me share a simple story. A man once argued with a monk trying to provoke him. The man hurled all kinds of insults, raised his voice, and even mocked the monk's appearance. Yet, the monk simply sat there, smiling gently, without a single word in response. After a while, the man became tired, frustrated, and finally asked, "Why don't you say something back? Why don't you defend yourself?" The monk replied, "If someone brings you a gift and you refuse to accept it, who does the gift belong to?" The man said, "Well, it remains with the giver." The monk smiled again. "Exactly. I refuse to accept your gift of anger, so it still belongs to you." That is the power of silence. It doesn't mean we don't know how to respond. It means we are wise enough to choose when to respond and when not to. When we react with words immediately, we often throw fuel into the fire. But silence is like water. It cools the flames and preserves peace. Think about it. When a child throws a tantrum, if the parent shouts louder than the child, the house turns into a battlefield. But if the parent remains calm and silent for a while, the child eventually settles down. Silence wins where noise fails. The same applies to adults. When two people argue, the one who goes silent first is often perceived as the weaker one. But actually, that person has chosen maturity over ego. Silence also saves us from unnecessary regret. How many times have we said something in anger and later wished we had kept quiet? Words once spoken cannot be taken back. They are like arrows. Once released, they cannot return to the bow. Silence protects us from that pain. There is an old saying, "Speak when you are angry, and you will make the best speech you will ever regret." Isn't that true? Moreover, silence brings dignity. People respect those who know when to remain quiet. Imagine a leader who reacts to every small criticism shouting back, defending, arguing. That leader loses respect. But when a leader maintains silence in the face of petty attacks and only speaks when it truly matters, their words carry much more weight. Silence creates value for words, just like darkness creates value for light. Another aspect of silence is inner strength. It takes real courage to remain quiet when provoked. Anyone can shout, anyone can argue, anyone can fight. But it takes strength to smile and remain silent. It is like holding a wild horse. You need control. Similarly, silence is self-control. So, my dear friends, silence is not a weakness to be ashamed of. It is a strength to be proud of. Just like the ocean is deep and calm beneath its surface, a silent person has depth within. The world may misunderstand silence, but deep inside, silence is the highest expression of inner strength. Life today is filled with endless noise, not just the honking of cars, the buzzing of phones, or the chatter of people, but the constant noise inside our own minds. Thoughts keep running like a never-ending train. What will happen tomorrow? Why did this happen yesterday? What do people think of me? What should I do next? With so much inner noise, it is no wonder that we feel confused, restless, and sometimes even lost. But silence, true silence, creates clarity. Think of a lake. If the surface of the lake is disturbed with waves, you cannot see the reflection of the sky or the mountains around it. But when the lake is still and calm, everything reflects clearly. The same happens in our minds. When thoughts are scattered and noisy, we lose direction. But when the mind is silent, suddenly answers begin to appear, solutions become visible, and life feels simpler. There's a beautiful story of a farmer who once lost his watch in a barn filled with hay. It was a precious watch given to him by his father, so he searched everywhere, throwing hay aside, moving boxes, even asking neighbors to help. But the more they searched with noise and chaos, the more impossible it became to find the watch. Finally, a small child walked in, and within a few minutes, he came out holding the watch. Everyone was surprised. "How did you find it so quickly?" they asked. The child smiled and said, "I just sat quietly in the barn, in silence. I heard the ticking sound of the watch and followed it." This is what silence does for us. The answers to many of our problems are already within us, but we cannot hear them because of the noise we create. When we sit silently, even for a few moments, clarity begins to emerge. Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come when you are sitting alone in silence? Maybe during a quiet walk, maybe under the stars, or even while taking a shower. It is because the mind, when not distracted by noise, finally has space to connect the dots and reveal insight. That is why so many thinkers, inventors, and artists often spend time in solitude. They know that creativity flows best in silence. Even in our daily decisions, silence helps. Suppose you are angry and want to reply to someone immediately. If you pause, take a deep breath, and remain silent for just a while, clarity arrives. You begin to see, is it worth saying this? Will it make things better or worse? What is the right response? That small pause of silence can save relationships, protect dignity, and lead you to wiser choices. Clarity also comes when silence connects us with nature. Go to a quiet forest, sit by the ocean, or simply spend time in a peaceful garden, and you will notice how your mind naturally begins to settle. In that silence, the unnecessary thoughts fade away, and the important thoughts stand out. Just as dust settles when the wind stops, unnecessary worries settle when we embrace silence. Silence also gives clarity about ourselves. We are so busy running after the world that we forget to ask, who am I? What do I really want? What truly makes me happy? These answers do not come from outside. They come from within, in the moments of silence. So clarity is not something we need to chase. It is something that naturally appears when we allow silence to enter. Just like muddy water clears itself, when left undisturbed, our life too becomes clear when we learn to be still. Peace is something every human being longs for. We work hard, we earn, we achieve, we travel, we buy things, but at the end of the day, all of it is only valuable if it gives us peace of mind. And yet, strangely, the one thing we desire most is the one thing that often feels missing. Why? Because peace doesn't come from possessions or positions. Peace is attracted to silence. Think about nature for a moment. Why do people feel so relaxed when they walk into a quiet forest, sit by a calm river, or watch the sunrise in silence? It is because silence is the natural habitat of peace. Peace feels at home where there is silence. When we live in constant noise, arguments at home, stress at work, the endless ringing of phones and notifications. Peace does not stay, it leaves. But when we create moments of silence, peace comes rushing back. Like a bird returning to its nest, there is a simple observation. When you enter a noisy marketplace, you rarely feel peace. But when you step into a temple, a church, a mosque, or any place of prayer, the first thing that touches you is the silence. That silence calms the heart and attracts peace almost instantly. That is why places of worship around the world encourage silence. Because silence is the doorway to peace. Let me share a small story. A man once complained to a wise elder that his home was full of conflict. Every day there were arguments, shouting, and stress. The elder asked him, "When was the last time you sat together as a family in silence?" The man was confused. Sit in silence. We always talk, argue, and discuss problems. The elder smiled and said, "Exactly. Words create walls, but silence builds bridges. Try sitting together quietly, even for a few minutes a day." The man followed this advice, and within weeks, he realized that silence created space for peace to enter. The arguments reduced, love grew stronger, and the home felt lighter. Silence doesn't only attract peace in relationships, it also attracts peace within ourselves. Most of our stress comes from overthinking. We replay past mistakes, we predict future worries, and we keep running in circles in our minds. But when we deliberately sit in silence, turning off distractions, calming the breath, and listening within, the mind slowly stops running. And in that stillness, peace naturally arrives. It's like snow falling on a busy city. At first, there's noise, cars honking, people rushing. But as the snow thickens, everything becomes quiet, almost magical. Silence covers the noise, and suddenly peace is everywhere. Similarly, when silence covers the noise inside us, a peace descends like gentle snowfall. Another way silence attracts peace is by changing the energy around us. Have you noticed how peaceful people attract you? You feel calmer in their presence, even without them saying a word. It's because their silence radiates peace. On the other hand, people who are loud, restless, and constantly talking often make us feel drained. The truth is, silence is contagious, and so is peace. When we cultivate silence, we begin to carry peace with us, and naturally, others feel drawn toward it. Peace is not something you chase, it is something you allow, and silence is the open door through which peace enters. The more we embrace silence in our daily lives, whether by sitting quietly for a few minutes, walking without our phone, or practicing stillness before speaking, the more we will find peace waiting for us. In our daily lives, we are surrounded by so many voices. The voice of society telling us how to live, the voice of advertisements telling us what to buy, the voice of people around us telling us who we should be. With so much noise, one voice often gets lost, the voice of our own heart. And yet, that is the only voice that truly knows what we need. The heart does not shout, it whispers. And to hear a whisper, we need silence. There's a beautiful story of a young man who wanted to discover his life's purpose. He went to many teachers, read many books, and asked many people for advice, but he remained confused. Finally, he was told to sit quietly by himself in silence every day. At first, it was uncomfortable. His mind kept running in all directions. But slowly, as days passed, something began to change. In that silence, his heart started to speak. It did not give him a detailed plan for life, but it gave him clarity about what truly mattered to him, what kind of life would make him happy. That silent guidance shaped his decisions far more than all the noise of the world ever could. This is how silence works. When we pause, the heart begins to communicate. Sometimes it comes as a feeling, sometimes as an intuition, sometimes as a gentle thought. But the heart always knows. For example, when we are about to make a decision, maybe about a job, a relationship, or a big step in life, we usually ask everyone for advice. But often, deep inside, our heart already knows the right answer. The only reason we don't hear it is because We are too busy listening to everything else. Silence clears that space so the heart can finally be heard. Think of moments when you felt something was right even though logic said otherwise. Maybe you felt drawn to help someone for no reason and later turned out to be meaningful. Maybe you felt uneasy about a certain choice even though it looked perfect on the outside. These are not coincidences. These are the gentle whispers of the heart. But to recognize them, we need silence. Silence also helps us heal the heart. When we go through pain, disappointment, or heartbreak, we often try to drown it with noise, endless talking, social media, or distractions. But healing doesn't come from running away. It comes from sitting in silence and letting the heart express itself. Sometimes tears flow in that silence. Sometimes deep feelings rise to the surface. But as they do, the heart begins to heal. Silence is like medicine. It allows the wound to breathe and recover. Even in relationships, silence allows the heart to speak. Two close friends or two people in love often sit together without saying a word, yet feel deeply connected. That is the heart speaking in silence. Words are not always necessary for communication. And true connection happens when hearts understand each other without noise. Silence also connects the heart with something higher. In prayer, we speak to God. But in silence, the heart listens. Many spiritual seekers throughout history spent long periods in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear the heart's voice, which is often the same as the voice of the divine guiding them from within. So, silence is not empty. It is full. It is full of the voice of the heart that patiently waits for us to listen. When we embrace silence, we discover that the answers, the healing, the guidance we were looking for outside were always present inside. In most relationships, people think communication means words, long conversations, constant explanations, endless reassurances. But if you look deeply, you will see that the strongest bonds are not always built on what is said, but often on what is left unsaid. Silence, in its purest form, is a language of trust. Take the example of a mother and her child. When a baby cries, the mother often doesn't need words to understand what is wrong. A glance, a sound, or even just silence between them communicates everything. The baby trusts that the mother will know, and the mother trusts that her silent presence is enough to comfort the child. That is trust expressed without language. Similarly, close friendships or deep relationships often thrive in silence. Have you ever sat with someone you deeply care for without speaking and still felt completely comfortable? No pressure to fill the space with chatter, no fear of being misunderstood, just a silent presence that says, I trust you, I am safe with you. On the other hand, when trust is weak, silence feels uncomfortable. People feel the urge to talk constantly, explain themselves, or fill the gaps with noise. But when trust is strong, silence feels natural. There's a small story of two monks who were walking together. They spent the whole day in silence, not exchanging a single word. At the end of the day, one monk said to the other, "What a beautiful conversation we had today." That may sound strange, but what he meant was that their trust was so deep that words were not necessary. Silence itself became the conversation. In everyday life, silence also shows trust in difficult situations. Imagine a heated argument. When one person chooses to stay silent, it doesn't always mean they have nothing to say. It often means they trust the bond enough not to damage it with harsh words. They know that silence will protect the relationship better than anger. This kind of silence is not weakness. It is faith that the other person will eventually understand without explanations. Silence is also the language of trust in spirituality. When we sit in silent prayer or meditation, we are trusting that there is a higher power who understands us without us saying a single word. We don't always need long requests or explanations. Silence itself is an expression of faith. Just as a child silently holds the hand of a parent while crossing a busy road, we silently hold the hand of the divine, trusting that we will be guided. Even in leadership, silence communicates trust. A leader who doesn't constantly micromanage, who allows people the space to work without endless instructions, is showing trust. And in return, that trust often brings loyalty and respect. Words can sometimes create pressure, but silence often creates freedom. If we look carefully, silence builds bridges where words sometimes build walls. Words can be twisted, misunderstood, or taken the wrong way, but silence, when rooted in trust, is rarely misunderstood. It communicates. I don't need to explain myself to you. You already know my heart. That is why the deepest relationships don't always require long conversations. They thrive on silent understanding. So, silence is not the absence of communication. It is communication at its purest. It is the voice of trust, the invisible thread that holds hearts together without words. Most mistakes in life are not made with our hands, they are made with our tongues. A slip of the tongue can cause more damage than a slip of the foot. When we walk and stumble, we may hurt ourselves. But when we speak without thought, we may hurt others, sometimes in ways that cannot be repaired. And that is why silence, at the right time, becomes our greatest protection. It reduces mistakes that words so often create. Think of a heated argument. When tempers rise, words begin to fly faster than arrows. In those moments, silence is wisdom. Because once those words are spoken, they cannot be taken back. You might apologize later. You might try to explain yourself, but the scar of those words often remains. A simple pause, a moment of silence could prevent the mistake entirely. There's an old saying, when angry, count to 10 before you speak. If very angry, count to 100. What is this advice really saying? It is telling us to create silence before responding. That pause is not weakness. It is prevention. It is like seeing a fire start and deciding not to throw wood into it. Let me share a little story. A young boy once became angry at his friend and shouted many harsh words. Later, he regretted it and went to his father for advice. His father gave him a hammer and a bag of nails and told him, "Each time you speak in anger, hammer a nail into the fence." The boy did so, and soon the fence was full of nails. Then the father told him, "Now remove the nails each time you apologize." The boy removed them, but the fence was full of holes. The father said, "Do you see? The words may be forgiven, but the scars remain." Silence would have left the fence whole. This is how silence reduces mistakes. By choosing not to speak in haste, we avoid creating wounds that are difficult to heal. Silence also prevents mistakes in decision making. Sometimes we rush to say yes or no without thinking and later regret it. But if we remain silent for a while, reflect, and then answer, our decision is often wiser. Silence gives us the space to examine, to see the bigger picture, and to respond thoughtfully. In professional life too, silence saves us. Many conflicts in workplaces begin because someone said something too quickly without considering the consequences. A leader who pauses in silence before speaking often avoids misunderstandings and earns greater respect. People trust those who think before they speak. Even in friendships and family, silence protects relationships. Suppose a loved one says something hurtful. The natural urge is to respond immediately, to defend, to attack back. But silence in that moment gives time for emotions to settle. It prevents the mistake of saying something that would make matters worse. Silence can turn potential enemies back into friends simply because it stops the chain reaction of hurt. Silence also reduces mistakes within our own mind. Many times, our thoughts push us to act impulsively, but when we sit in silence, we give ourselves time to listen to reason, to weigh the consequences. In that quiet space, mistakes become less likely. It is often said that we should speak only when our words are more valuable than our silence. Otherwise, silence itself is the better choice. Most regrets in life are not about what we didn't say. They are about what we said without thinking. That is why silence is not empty. It is full of protection. One of the greatest challenges of our modern age is distraction. Notifications on our phones, endless streams of information, constant noise from people and surroundings. It is as if our attention is pulled in 100 directions at once. And when our attention is scattered, our energy is scattered, we become busy but not productive, moving but not progressing. The secret to reversing this is silence, because silence increases focus. Imagine a magnifying glass. If you move it constantly, the sunlight passing through it has no effect. But when you hold it steady and still, the same light becomes powerful enough to burn paper. The mind works in the same way. A restless, noisy mind cannot achieve much, but a silent, focused mind becomes powerful enough to achieve extraordinary things. There's a simple story of a student who complained to his teacher, "Whenever I study, my mind keeps running here and there. I cannot focus." The teacher asked him to bring a glass of water and hold it while walking across the courtyard. The student did so, carefully watching the glass so it wouldn't spill. When he reached the other side, the teacher asked, "What did you notice along the way?" The student replied, "Nothing at all. I was focused only on the water." The teacher smiled and said, "That is the power of focus. When you silence distractions and keep your attention on one thing, everything else fades. A silence is what creates that focus. When we deliberately step away from noise, turning off our devices, sitting quietly, breathing deeply, we create the inner environment where the mind can concentrate fully. Without silence, focus is almost impossible. In work, silence enhances productivity. Have you noticed how difficult it is to complete an important task when there is constant talking, interruptions, or noise around you? But when you sit in silence, even for a short while, you accomplish more in 1 hour than in 3 hours of distraction. Silence sharpens the mind like a knife on a whetstone. Silence also increases focus in relationships. When you listen silently to someone without interrupting, your attention is completely on them. That kind of focused silence makes the other person feel valued and heard. Many misunderstandings vanish simply because someone chose to listen in silence rather than speak over the other. In this way, silence becomes not just focus on tasks, but focus on people. In spiritual practice, silence is the foundation of focus. People who meditate or pray know that silence is not empty. It is concentration. When the noise of the mind quiets down, awareness sharpens and focus deepens. Even athletes, musicians, and performers often take a moment of silence before they begin, centering themselves so their energy is directed fully into the performance. That silence brings them into the zone where focus is natural. Think also about archery. An archer does not release the arrow in noise and chaos. They pull the string back in silence, hold their breath, steady their mind, and then release. That silent concentration determines whether the arrow hits the target. Our goals in life are no different. Silence steadies our aim, increases our focus, and ensures that when we act with precision. Without silence, we live like scattered arrows, going in every direction and hitting nothing. With silence, we become like the archer, focused, steady, effective. And when focus arrives, success follows naturally. When we think about building strong relationships, most of us imagine long conversations, words of appreciation, and constant communication. While words are important, they are not the only way to connect. In fact, sometimes the deepest bonds are built not through words, but through silence. Silence, when it is filled with presence and sincerity, becomes the invisible glue that holds hearts together. Think about sitting with a close friend. You don't always need to talk. You can sit together on a bench, watch the sunset, share a cup of tea, or simply walk side by side without speaking. Yet, in those moments of silence, the connection feels stronger than in hours of conversation with someone else. Why? Because true relationships don't demand constant words. They demand presence. Silence allows that presence to shine. There is a touching story of an elderly couple who were asked the secret of their long and happy marriage. The husband smiled and said, "We never ran out of things to talk about, but more importantly, we never felt pressured to talk when words weren't needed. We were comfortable in silence. That comfort in silence is a sign of deep trust and understanding." Silence also deepens relationships because it allows space for listening. Too often, conversations become battles of who speaks more, who explains more, who argues better. But real listening happens in silence, when you sit quietly and give someone your full attention without interrupting. They feel truly heard. That silent listening communicates respect and love more powerfully than 100 words of advice. Sometimes people don't want solutions, they just want presence. Silence offers that gift. Even in moments of conflict, silence protects relationships. If two people argue and both speak loudly at the same time, nothing improves. Anger only grows. But if one person chooses silence, the fire of conflict begins to cool. That silence is not avoidance, it is protection. It saves the relationship from being burned by words that cannot be taken back. Later, when emotions settle, words can be chosen more carefully. In this way, silence safeguards bonds. Silence is also a form of respect. In relationships, when you allow someone space, when you do not pressure them with constant questions or chatter, you are showing respect for their inner world. You are saying, "I trust you enough to give you space, and I know our bond is strong enough to survive without constant noise." That quiet respect strengthens the relationship. Another beauty of silence in relationships is that it reveals authenticity. When you can be silent with someone and still feel comfortable, it means you don't need to perform, impress, or pretend. You can just be yourself, and that authenticity is the foundation of any deep relationship. On the other hand, if silence feels awkward, it often means the relationship hasn't reached that depth yet. Silence is not emptiness. It is a presence that says more than words. It can be the warm silence of a hug, the peaceful silence of sitting side by side, or the healing silence after forgiveness. These silent moments are often remembered more deeply than long speeches or conversations. In every bond, whether between parent and child, friends, partners, or even colleagues, Silence carries a hidden strength. It allows hearts to connect directly without the interference of words. It creates a depth that words sometimes cannot reach. And when silence is embraced, relationships move from surface level connection to soul level connection. Human life is filled with countless conversations. We speak to family, to friends, to colleagues, to strangers. But there is one relationship that goes beyond all others, the relationship between us and the divine. The difficulty is that while we keep talking to God through prayers, requests, and complaints, we rarely pause to listen. Silence is the sacred bridge that allows us not just to speak to the divine, but to hear the divine speak back. Think of prayer as two parts. One part is us talking. The other is us listening. Most people never reach the second part because their minds are too noisy. They rush through words, ask for blessings, demand answers, and then run back into the noise of life. But when we learn to sit in silence after prayer, something beautiful happens. A calmness arises, a sense of guidance appears, and sometimes solutions to our deepest problems reveal themselves. This is not imagination. It is the voice of the lean, heard only in silence. There's a story of a man who desperately wanted answers from God. He went into a temple every day and prayed loudly, crying and shouting his requests. Yet he felt no response. One day, exhausted, he sat quietly in silence with his eyes closed. In that stillness, for the first time, he felt peace wash over him, and a quiet inner voice said, "My child, I have been speaking to you all along, but your noise was too loud for you to hear." The man realized that God's voice is not in the thunder, but in the silence. All great spiritual traditions emphasize silence. In Christianity, there is the practice of silent contemplation. In Buddhism, meditation is rooted in silence. In Hinduism, sages retreated to mountains and forests for silence. In Islam, the stillness of sujud, a prostration, is filled with silent connection. Across cultures and faiths, silence has always been recognized as the pathway to the divine. Why is silence so powerful in connecting us to God? Because the divine is subtle, gentle, and present in the depths of our hearts. Noise keeps us on the surface, but silence takes us inward. Just as you cannot see the stars in daylight, but only in the quiet darkness of night, you cannot perceive the divine in the noisy rush of daily life. You notice it only in the silence of the soul. Silence also teaches surrender. When we are silent, we let go of the urge to control, to demand, to explain. We simply sit in trust, allowing the divine presence to hold us. That surrender itself becomes a form of worship. Just like a child silently resting in the arms of a parent without asking for anything, we too rest silently in the embrace of God. Even science confirms that silence has a profound impact on our brain and body. It lowers stress, heals the nervous system, and enhances awareness. And when the body is calm, the heart is more open to spiritual experiences. Silence becomes not just a practice, but a doorway to transcendence. It is said that when you speak, you are only repeating what you already know, but when you are silent, you may hear what you truly need to know, and that knowing often comes as divine wisdom, a gentle guiding presence that reassures us we are not alone. So, silence is not emptiness, it is full of the divine. Every moment of silence is an invitation from God to enter His presence. And when we accept that invitation, we find that silence is not just quietness, it is communion, it is guidance, it is love,